We are joined on the program by Richard Bean of, the Bakersfield Californian. Self-proclaimed elitist, apparently. That was I always enjoy your blog, but where you outed yourself as an elitist, that was a real nice moment.
I did not out myself. I was outed by a reader.
There was a bit of mea culpa in that, though.
Because my original sin was promoting a fundraiser for a nonprofit that does a lot of good work, and I mentioned that tickets cost $75, and I was told that I was an elitist because who can afford $75 tickets? Look, if you don't want to go, don't go.
Right.
Right?
But, I mean, I go to a lot of these fundraising events, and they cost the problems that these fundraisers are trying to solve cost money. You're not going to do it $5 at a time. It's, they give
Plus,
you a lot.
People who know me, including our guest, David Cohn,
right.
Managing partner of Jane Cohn Styles, is, full disclosure, a friend of mine. Dave, would you call me an elitist?
I'd call you cheap.
Cheap. There you go. I mean, I asked Ray at Trader Joe's what kind of wine I buy. It's normally $4.99. That's Spanish blend.
Well, all right. No, that's the one.
Cohn will tell you I don't pay more than $10 for a bottle of wine, but I will drink his.
Well, certainly, yeah. If he's got the good stuff, then why not? Sidle up to Cohn's table.
There you go.
All week, we all knew that this shoe was going to drop, and there's another shoe coming in this case with Deputy Swearingen and the two. It's just a horrible tragedy. But Mr. Cohn is going to walk us through the legality of what's going on and all this, I would imagine. So,
thank you for coming, David.
My pleasure.
Talking. If somebody is listening there and you text me, or if you know me, and tell me if you can hear me, because I was having trouble hearing your previous guests. I could hear you and Hop. You guys don't even have a microphone. I mean, I could take away your microphone and hear you, Scott. But if you can't hear, let us know. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit.
Sure.
But thank you for coming. We're talking about this. Yeah, you're right. This terrible case where this Kern County Sheriff's deputy was going 80 miles an hour on 80. Is that right?
84.
Okay, 84 on North Chester.
Norris Road.
Norris Road, sorry. Would you like to tell us what happened?
On December 16 of 2011, there were two sheriff's deputies that were parked in a church parking lot off of Norris Road, just east of Chester Avenue. They heard a call come over the radio from the Bakersfield Police Department, where apparently the Bakersfield Police Department was pursuing a grand theft auto near the intersection of Highway 65 and Merle Haggard. So both of these deputies, who were in two different vehicles, one went off to the north on Chester Avenue, and Deputy Swearingen came out onto Norris Road and crossed Chester, traveling down Norris Road at speeds in excess of 80 miles an hour. When he was approaching Diane Drive, he suddenly saw two individuals who were crossing the street and hit them, and then they were both killed instantly.
And what time was this?
This was about 7 o'clock at night.
And he did not have his sirens on, right?
Didn't have his emergency lights on, didn't have his siren on. And the law is very clear that a peace officer, like you or I, has to obey traffic rules. They're no different than we are when it comes to local traffic rules. What the vehicle code says is that if they're responding to an emergency and they activate their emergency lights and or siren, then they're allowed to travel in excess of the speed limit. The obvious reason is to warn pedestrians and motorists that they're traveling over the speed limit, that they're in an emergency situation. Well, clearly in this case, Deputy Swearingen didn't do that, and these two people who were innocently crossing the street and crossing in a street, in a part of the street where they're permitted to cross the street, we never saw him until obviously it was too late.
And he ran into them, and you were representing, well, 24-year-old Daniel Hiller and 30-year-old Crystal Jolie. They were friends, right?
You know, they were acquaintances. They had apparently just met up that evening. It's not really clear how they got together that evening because Daniel Hiller had earlier been at a kind of a T-shirt store on North Chester and was on his way home when apparently somewhere met up with Jolly, she was walking in the same direction, and Daniel was pushing a motorcycle across Norris Road at Diane when he was struck and killed by Deputy Swearingen. And Ms. Jolly was kind of right behind him when this happened.
Okay, and there are different plaintiffs, there's different plaintiffs in this case, correct? You represented...
I represented Daniel's two young children.
How old are they?
Well, at the time, they were 1 and 3.
Wow.
And as well as his fiancee, Whitney. And the Jollies, Crystal left 3 children and a husband.
Okay, and another attorney represented them. So the
Right.
total settlement was 8.8, and Hyler's children, they will be the recipient of...
Daniel's children and his fiancee will receive the $4.8 million, with the bulk of that going to the children.
Now, is that, in the story we ran on it, we said it could be the largest settlement involving an auto accident with the county as the defendant. Is that correct?
That's what I've been told, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, how do you, how do you value, a human life? I mean, what does this come down to? Because now you didn't go. This was a negotiated settlement, right? You didn't.
Yes.
You didn't go to trial.
Correct.
I mean, when you go to trial, what is your argument about? What is the value of a life determined by, or the settlement by the age of his dependency leave or his earning power, or what is your argument?
Actually, you're pretty accurate. In the case of Daniel, it's a couple of things. Number one, Daniel was an oil field worker. In fact, had gotten off work earlier that day. So we know that Daniel has certain earning power. We can calculate statistically what his work-life expectancy will be, what he'll earn over his work-life expectancy, and what his contributions to his children would have been over a certain period of time. So that's part of the calculation. The other part of the calculation, which is always the most difficult part for a trial lawyer to kind of demonstrate to a jury, is, as you just said, how do you measure the value of a human life? And that's always the most difficult job for us. And you try to use examples. You try to first demonstrate the relationship, in this case, that Daniel had with his children. Fortunately, we had videos of Daniel playing with his children, a myriad of photographs showing him interacting with his kids. And you just try to convey that loss, the loss of love, society, comfort, and protection that those children will not have. They're not going to have a father now.
So if this is a $4.8 million case because he leaves 2 very young children, if he were 50 years old and single, or say married with no children, does that make it a $2 million case, a $1 million case? Or, I mean, how do you?
In that instance, if you're a 50-year-old and you leave a wife and she's dependent upon you for her support, that's certainly a calculation that we can do to figure out what's the widow's loss of income from her husband, assuming he's 50 and he would work till age 65. I mean, you can easily calculate what that number would be in terms of her financial loss. And then if they're 50 and it's a long-term beautiful marriage with grown children, that's part of that. That's part of what you ask the jury to consider when trying to, put a number on that loss. But I admit it's very hard to do.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. So what happens to this money? Does this on for Daniel's children? Does it go into a trust? Does it sit in a passbook account? I mean, is it given to him over a period of years, like a lotto payout, or how does that work?
Well, the courts first understand that any settlement that is on behalf of a minor, it always has to be approved by the court. Ultimately, however we handle the money for Caden and Caleb, we're going to have to explain to the court what we're going to do with that money. And generally, a lot of times what might happen is you might put that money in what's called a blocked account, meaning you would put the money in essentially a savings account. It can't be touched unless there's an order from the court allowing some of that money to come out of that account. That's really not a very good way to handle money, especially when you're dealing with really young children, because we all know that savings accounts right now, they pay very little interest. So what we have turned to now are what we call structured settlements. And they're really annuities. And so what I will do, when I've already started the process, is I've gotten in contact with a person called a structured settlement expert. And what that person will do is she'll look at various annuities that are put out by life insurance companies like Metropolitan, Allstate Life. These are companies that have huge assets in the billions of dollars, and they will offer over a long-term payout an interest rate that might be as high right now, perhaps 5%. And so because we've got young minor children who, in the case of these two young boys, one's now 2, one is now 4, they're clearly not going to touch that money until the oldest reaches the age of 18.
Right, Counselor, we're late for a break. If we'll hold that thought, and we'll be right back. And the future, because this case is going to continue on. There's a whole other part of it that we haven't even been introduced yet. We'll talk more with David Cohn on the other side of this. It's First Look with Scott Cox at Bakersfield.com. News Talk 1180 KERN. This is just one of those unfortunate stories where there's no winner. There's no happy ending in this for anybody. The victims, the deputy, taxpayers, everybody loses in these cases, but they do bring up a lot of interesting legal points. And we got two very smart people in the room to discuss just that. We got Richard Bean and David Cohn is here. Welcome from Chain Cone Styles.
See?
It's hard to keep these. It's hard to remember who all the partners are, but I think I got that one right, Mr. Bean.
You know what's great about being me, Scott?
The vest collection?
The vest collection. That is one thing, yes. But I have peeps, okay?
Right.
I told you we're having some audio problems, but I have people out there who are listening to the program, Russ Elrod, Kurt Pierce, who are texting me now telling me about the audio problem. So I've got a whole posse of people.
I also have peeps. I've got a bunch of people.
Janice Varner is.
She's one of my peeps.
She's one of your peeps. I got
peeps.
it. I got
my
it.
peep.
No, we're talking about this terrible case up on Norris Road where Deputy John Swearingen ran into Daniel Heiler and his fiancee, who was also the mother of his two children, right?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay. Crystal Jolly killed them both. There's a $4.8 million settlement that will be structured among his fiancee. His fiancee and their two children, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, one thing about this case is One thing about this case that is really bizarre to me. Why didn't he have his lights on? I mean, you see these guys; they always have their lights on. Just even go around you, but.
Well, I can tell you what his excuse is.
What?
Well, his excuse is that based on road conditions, which he never really defined very well, it's permissible to drive over the speed limit. You see, one thing that's kind of unique about this case that I've never had happen in a case like this before is Deputy Swearingen's civil lawyers actually allowed him to give a deposition in our civil case. We deposed him, and for those of you who don't know, a deposition is merely taking somebody's statement under oath out of court with a court reporter, so it's all recorded. And so we had an opportunity to take Deputy Swearingen's deposition about 10 days ago. So we have heard his version of what happened and why he did what he did. The only problem with that is that when I asked him, well, what do you mean you can break the speed limit or violate the vehicle code based on the conditions on the road? I said, where'd that come from? And he said, well, I was told that by some sergeants or some other training officers. And it's like, okay, well, who are the people that told you you could do this? Well, I don't remember. Now, we also had an opportunity to take the statement of the person at the Sheriff's Department who's responsible for teaching the policies and procedures when officers go Code 3. Code 3, lights and sirens. It was very clear from this sergeant from the Kern County Sheriff's Department that Deputy Swearingen violated every one of their policies and procedures. One of the things Deputy Swearingen told the CHP officers who investigated this case was that he was reaching down to get his microphone,
But his big gulp was in the way.
44-ounce big gulp, and that when he looked up, the two victims were right in front of him. Well, the problem is the Kern County Sheriff's Department policies and procedures do not require that he ask permission to go Code 3. That's discretionary on his part. So you've got to ask yourselves, from east of Chester to Diane Drive, why was he not going Code 3 with lights and sirens?
Going
Or at
84
least
miles an
going
hour.
84
Right.
miles an hour. And look, I mean, the one thing, there's two things that everyone in this case agrees on. He was going 84 miles an hour. There's no debate about that because we've got the telemetry from not only his car, but the Sheriff's Department. They track their own vehicles. They know at any one point in time where their vehicles are and how fast they're going. So there's no debate. He was going well over the speed limit. And there's no debate. He violated their policies and procedures. So you can slice and dice this any way you want in terms of what Mr. Heiler and Ms. Jolly did. The bottom line is this. What I've got right here is over 250 pages of a police report that was prepared by the CHP MATE team.
I tell you, we got to get to a break again. We'll get back to that and the future legal. This is not over for Mr. Swearingen. He's still got big legal problems.
Criminal case coming
Oh
up.
yeah. I'll tell you this: if you're getting sued and you're sitting in that little room there, the last thing you want is for this guy to come in and sit on the other side of the table. That would not make for a good day. We've got to take a break. We'll come back and we'll tell you about what's the future holds for Mr. Swearingen. He's still in big trouble, and we'll talk and we'll ask Mr. Cohn how this settlement is going to affect that case moving forward, if at all. We'll be right back. It's First Look with Scott Cox. It's Bakersfield.com and News Talk 1180 KERN. And with that, we'll go back to our conversation in progress with Richard Bean and David Cohn.
Can I ask a question too? I wanted to ask David Cohen that the settlements seem to come pretty quick, and just as a layman, settlements that come quick usually mean it's a pretty airtight thing. Either that or the somebody involved didn't really want to go to trial and wanted to avoid a long trial and figured they could cut their losses this way. But I'm going to guess in this case, you had a pretty good against Swearingen, pretty good case there. This has got to give at least a hint that maybe the prosecution in the criminal case is got to be thinking the same thing. They're looking at maybe seriously sending this deputy away for a while, or is that a correct assessment?
Well, I don't think the county would have paid close to $9 million if they had some feeling that they could do much better
Yeah.
if we went to trial. So we had a very, very good case.
Yeah.
As I said, I mean, it's undeniable. You can't argue with the fact that he was going well over the speed limit. You can't argue with the fact that he violated the sheriff's department's own policies and procedures. So I mean, I think that's the settlement speaks for itself.
So going into a criminal case with those two very firm things in mind, it doesn't look very good for Swearingen, does it?
Well, I wouldn't want to be in Deputy Swearingen's shoes, that's for certain. No, I think he's got a real uphill battle.
What are the criminal charges against him?
He's charged with vehicular manslaughter with gross negligence, which is a felony.
And what would be if he were convicted? What are the general sentence for that?
Well, I would imagine that the district attorney's office would ask for state prison. I don't know what the sentence structure is for that kind of a crime, but
You would not want to be a.
I was going
you
to
would not
say,
wanna
do you want to be
sheriff's
a
deputy
former
in State
law
Penn.
enforcement officer in prison?
no,
That's not a good place to be, is it?
no, I wouldn't think so.
You would have to be segregated from the general population.
Well, you
Gener-
hope so.
Yeah, you would have to.
Even then, wow. Well, we don't have any reason. Well, is there a minimum sentence for this that we would expect?
I would think the minimum sentence might be 16 months, 2 years, but honestly, I don't know.
Yeah. No, punishment fitting the crime wise. It seems like what would happen to a law enforcement officer in a state penitentiary might be a little bit out of whack with the transgression of him behind the wheel of the car.
Let me bring up one point that I don't want people to lose sight of. If any one of us had been driving down Norris Road at 84 miles an hour and we hit and killed 2 people, is there any doubt in anyone's mind that we wouldn't have been prosecuted the same as Deputy Swearingen is being prosecuted? And, I have to commend the district attorney's office because I think a lot of times the public looks at the conduct of peace officers and thinks that, these guys aren't held to the same standards that we're held to and sometimes get off. And I commend Lisa Green and her office and Mike Raceburn, the prosecuting attorney, for treating Deputy Swearingen the same as you or I would be treated. And I think that's very important. And I think that lends credibility to this process and to the district attorney's office.
Could you make, well, obviously you had made the case that if one of us had done this and hit those, couldn't you make the case that it's worse for someone with the training and everything that you get in law enforcement is it not worse for a law enforcement official to have been guilty of this gross vehicular manslaughter as opposed to just a regular civilian?
Well, they certainly have training that you and I don't have in terms of they go to an academy, they're given special driving instructions. I know in this case, Deputy Swearingen went to I think he said he went through a 40-hour course out in San Bernardino where they teach high-speed driving and defensive driving, and so he had training that I certainly have never had.
Dave, what kind of case would it have been? Would it have been just an entirely different case if he had just simply flipped on that siren and lights?
I probably wouldn't be sitting here.
There might not have been a case. They would have seen the siren, heard the sirens, seen the lights, and
Right.
gotten out.
I know.
Of the way.
It just puzzles me why you're going 80 plus miles per hour and you don't put the siren on. I don't get that.
Well, it's interesting. There were a lot of people that came to the scene that night, and what I've heard repeatedly from people that live in the area is that the deputies ride around their area. They're always driving too fast. They call them cowboys. I heard many people say, well, it was only a matter of time before this was going to happen. So, I mean, I think it's a mindset within the department that it's okay to drive around certain areas and not really obey the speed limit.
Well, we should pose that question to Donnie Youngblood sometime. You have another pending case against the Kern County Sheriff's Department involving a young lady in Tehachapi, right?
I do.
You want
yes.
to talk about that?
Well, I'll talk a little about it. It involves a young woman where the police came to her apartment up in Tehachapi.
Sheriff's Department.
Yeah, the Sheriff's Department, excuse me. A deputy later comes back to her apartment and says he wants to search her. Now, this is a young girl who has absolutely no criminal record, and he ultimately gets her under color of authority to disrobe. Has her bend over a bed, says he's searching for drugs. And
Was he alone with her?
yes, which is, that's just so outside the departmental policy. And then leaves after, obviously she didn't have any drugs. There were no drugs in the apartment. And he is being prosecuted by the district attorney's office as well. So again, this is some kind of a rogue deputy up in Tehachapi that who's doing these kinds of things. And this woman, our client, is not the only victim. There was another victim
By the same deputy?
by the same deputy that happened just a couple of days before our assault. And there is even another case where we represent a woman who's 76 years old who was also accosted by this deputy. Right,
A
76.
76-year-old.
How old was the woman in the case that you're representing, this current case? Or how old is the woman?
20,
And how old was she at the time of the incident?
20, 19, 20, 21.
Okay.
Wow. Well, I tell you what, on that happy note, we'll take a break and wow. And then we'll come back and talk some more with David Cohn and Richard Bean. We'll do it right after this. It's First Look with Scott Cox. It's Bakersfield.com. It's News Talk 1180 KERN. Hop, I'm drawing a blank. What cop show is this?
This is Night Court.
Oh, Night Court.
That's
Thank
the
you.
Night Court.
I get it. It's a lawyer theme. I get it. Thank you. Hop came in handy. We're back. It's First Look with Scott Cox. It's Bakersfield.com and News Talk 1180 KERN. We're joined on the program by David Cohn, Richard Bean. This is Mr. Bean's hour.
Yeah,
So, there you
Dave,
go.
thank you for coming in. We've been talking about that horrible case up on Norris Road where a Deputy John Swearingen at 7:30 at night ran into two people, killed them both, and Dave represented Daniel Heiler's fiance and their two children, and family wasn't awarded a $4.8 million settlement, and the other young woman who was killed received a $4 million settlement, but somebody else represented them.
Yes.
Right. And then you're telling us about another case up in Tehachapi involving a Kern County Sheriff's deputy. Tell me this, Dave, when I get my property tax bill, is there going to be a line item that, that goes straight to you,
Well, with respect to the Heiler and Jolly settlements, the county is self-insured for the first $2.5 million. So the first $2.5 million of any settlement that involves the county, the sheriff's department, or any other county department, the taxpayers do pay that. The rest of that is paid by what's called reinsurance or excess insurance. So in this case, the county's insurance company paid of that 8.8 million, they paid 6.5 million.
The county, meaning us.
No, well, the county paid 2.3 million.
Okay. That's
The-
us.
you-
the
that's
county,
us.
including
That's
you too,
including
any
me
taxpayer.
too.
Right, right.
But I mean, there's a very simple way to correct that, and that's for, us as taxpayers to say to those who are in charge, clean up your act. We don't want to continue to have to pay out these claims, and I mean, it has to start somewhere.
Dave, you don't really hear. I don't want to be fair to Donnie Youngblood. We need to get him on the program, Scott. But you don't hear about these cases involving the city police. There seems to be a number of them with sheriff's deputies. Is there what is your view of kind of the culture of the sheriff's department, or are these just isolated cases?
I suspect to some extent there are isolated cases. Look, I've known Donnie. We went to high school together. I think he's a really good sheriff. I think it's like any organization. There's always a few bad apples. I don't know that you can make a comparison between the Kern County Sheriff's Department and the Bakersfield Police Department, because I can tell you that over the years, the Bakersfield Police Department, they've had their own problems with officers.
It just seems, just recently there were sheriff's deputies and CHP officers involved in the death in front of KMC, correct?
The Silva case.
The Silva case.
Right.
And then we had this case. And then you talked about the Tehachapi case where a deputy allegedly strip searched a young woman in clear violation of sheriff's department rules and regulations. You can't take somebody into a room and strip search them without a witness there, or right.
Well,
Or a
first,
female deputy.
first, a female deputy would only be allowed to do that, and even then, under strict rules of supervision. Look, the sheriff's department has a lot more law enforcement employees, a lot more deputies than the Bakersfield Police Department has. They cover a much greater geographic area than the Bakersfield Police Department does. So I don't know that I would say that there is something terribly wrong with the sheriff's department that is that much different than what you might find with the Bakersfield Police Department. I just think that for whatever reason, some of their bad apples have come to light, and we all hear about it, and as taxpayers, we're all paying for it.
Do you know anything about the timing of the criminal case against Swearingen?
Well, I can tell you that Deputy Swearingen's criminal trial is scheduled to start on March 10. It's very interesting. This case is somewhat rare in the sense that normally the criminal case would go before the civil case. But fortunately, in this case, we had a trial judge that was very adamant that we were going to follow the rules that we follow in civil court, and there were not going to be long continuances simply to help the criminal case, because our trial judges in Kern County work very hard to see that cases are brought to trial within about 18 months of when we file that lawsuit. And the criminal case against Deputy Swearingen has dragged on for well over 2 years. And, the trial judge, to his credit, said, look, I don't know what schedule or timetable the criminal case is on, but I'm not going to hold up the civil case because these litigants have a right to have their case heard in court as expeditiously as possible. So that's why we ended up having the civil case could have gone to trial actually before the criminal case.
Mr. Cohen, how often, in your experience in handling cases like this, how often have you seen lawsuits against law enforcement, whether it be BPD or the Kern County Sheriff's Department? Is this a fairly common thing, or is this, like Mr. Bean was saying, is this isolated incidents like the case up in Tehachapi and this one in Oildale?
Well, if you look at my career, you would see that I've had a number of lawsuits against the Kern County Sheriff's Department, against the California Department of Corrections for a lot of years. and it's a big part of my practice. I mean, I'm involved in the Silva case. I was involved in the Moore case. I settled a case last year against the Kern County Sheriff's Department where a detention officer had essentially molested one of the inmates, a female inmate. So it's certainly a large part of my practice.
We've only got about a minute left, but how does this verdict, how does this settlement, does that color the criminal case going forward? Does that work for him or against him?
You know, that's a really good question, Scott. Perhaps some jurors would say, all right, these families settled for a large sum of money, and that should be the end of it, and leave Deputy Swearingen out of it. I think other jurors may look at this settlement and say, that just goes to show how bad his conduct was, that the county was willing to settle this case for close to $9 million, and he should be punished. So I don't know. This settlement, I think, could cut both ways. I think it will be very difficult for Mr. Swearingen's lawyers because they're going to have to find out from these jurors, well, do you know about this settlement? Is that
And
going-
who's not going to know about this? It's on the front page of the paper in letters this big. Of course, everybody knows about the settlement. We have used up all our time. We always appreciate your time. I don't know if this counts as billable hours, but put it on the Bean account is fine. It's always good to see you. Mr. Bean, you as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
let-
David Cohn, for coming in. Appreciate it.
Everybody to Muertos for the rap party. Tomorrow, just saying. Christine Gronkowski is going to be here from the MS Society. It's MS Awareness Week. Jennifer Sutherland will be here. Lost a leg to a disease, is being recognized by the USC Hospital for her bravery. You're going to want to meet her. Do it tomorrow. This guy, have a great day.